Well, welcome back to Detroit Garage. Getting a lot of questions about putting the Detroit in this Ford and how did I get all the electronics to work and the transmission to shift and all these things. These trucks are becoming very cheap with the 6.4s and the gassers, the 5.4 and the 6.8 Tridents. These trucks now, a Lariat, you can buy for under $4,000 here in Canada. So 3,200 US-ish with blowing engines. So the big question is, how do you take a Cummins or a International or a Detroit or any of these engines and make it work inside this truck? So I'll go over some of the items I did. There's lots of resources to look at. There's D-stroked and there's DCS, diesel conversion specialists. They do conversions as well as Allison automatics behind whatever engine you want to mount it behind. So I chose to use the Ford 5R110 because it was free and I was able to buy 2 transmissions at an auction cheaply. So I used the one for testing, and the test transmission's still in it. I never took it out. It's working perfect. There's quite a few people catering to these swaps now. Not for Detroits, but for the Cummins and engines like that. There's a Cummins Tech site on Facebook full of really good information with the 5R110 on the Cummins and the ZF6 and other transmissions. I chose the Detroit and the 5R110 because both of them I had in stock, and this Detroit was meant to go into a different project, but it never happened, so here we are. 4 years later, 50,000 miles, and the truck's driven daily, used like I did with the 6.4. So how did I get everything to work? Well, I kept 11 sensors. 11 or 13, I believe it was 11, and I'll go through the list of things, but you want to keep as many sensors on the engine that were on the 6.4 or the Triton or whatever engine. All right, so the 11 sensors I kept oil temp, fuel temp, water temp, EGT, mass airflow sensor, manifold air pressure sensor, the back pressure, the crank and the cam sensors, cold air charge tube temperatures, throttle position sensor, fuel pressure, and I added fuel pressure and oil pressure. So those are the 13 sensors I've used. So I'll run through them for you and show you where they are on the engine. Also, fuel shutoff solenoid. That's another item you have to have, unless you want a pull cable, but nobody wants that. So on the engine, we've got filter minder that's hooked up to the cab as well. A light comes on if this filter ever becomes plugged. This is the standard OEM Ford filter. Very good filters. Your mass airflow sensor. And then I've got back pressure here, and the EGT's on the back side here, tapped into a bung. Your PCM is here. The wiring harness, you custom make yourself. There's people that do it. I mentioned earlier, D-stroked and DCS, but I recommend you do it yourself. Solder all connections. use heat tape and, you know, do the job right, then you'll never have trouble and it'll fit your engine perfectly. For the cam and the crank sensor, I reached out to a guy. He made a product called Swap Helper, and it converts a Cummins style tone wheel into the tach and cam signal that the computer uses. And that's over here. The mounts broke off of it. I gotta fix that, but hopefully the camera picks that up. It's called Swap Helper. And that ties into the wiring harness of the truck. There's instructions. If you join the Fummins site, there's instructions there, like I mentioned, and lots of help and support. So there's the water temp. Oil temp's down on the, obviously on the oil pan. On the Ford, they're just by the oil cooler, but on this engine, it was too hard to adapt that. So I just put a sensor on the oil pan, and it gives me an oil pan temperature. That's good enough. That's what Detroit did in the day, so that's what I did. There's my fuel pressure over here on that filter. The fuel temp sensor is on the back side of the block, and it's reading water temperature, and it's been fine. I needed that apparently for the 5R110, but I'm not 100% sure. Alternators, I used dual alternators off the 6.4, mounted those. Again, it keeps that PCM happy. I don't know how to delete it without going down to Ford and getting rid of an alternator and reprogramming the PCM. Possibly I could do it on HP tuners, but I never looked into it. For the cooling, I used the OEM fan control from the 6.4, and it's programmable through the PCM, through HP tuners. For the CAC temp and the pressure are here, these two here, 1, 2. One of them is the boost pressure, and the other one's the temp sensor for the cold air charge tube, and that's it there. For oil pressure, there's an idiot light on the dash, and all I did was hook the sensor up to the oil filter housing. Separately, I hooked up a fuel pressure gauge and an oil pressure gauge through the Edge tuner. So as far as wiring diagrams are concerned, there's a number of sites. You just have to Google them. And again, check out that Fummins site. They've got all that information there. You just have to ask. Lots of details on this stuff. I mean, I started this project 5 years ago. It took me a year to do. And again, there's no support for Detroit, so you're on your own. But as far as electronics are concerned and all that other stuff, there's lots of information. I'll go show you inside the truck and all the wiring stuff and talk about that a bit more. So when you do these projects, you want to make the truck like it was meant to be. Built with a Cummins, a Detroit, or an International, or whatever engine you put in this thing. You want it to be like it was, you know, made that way. In my opinion, I think it's the most trouble-free method is to build it like it was supposed to be, you know, from the factory, and wire it that way, and then you don't have any issues. These trucks are bad enough with electric issues, let alone putting your own bad wiring into them. So yeah, it's a stock appearance, and then all the dash lights work. Disregard that check brake thing. That's a continuous recording will now start. That check brake issue has been running in this truck for about 7 years. So all the lights work. You've got, you know, your check engine light, all that stuff, and then when you fire it up, all that stuff should disappear. All right, and everything works as it should. It works like factory. And then for additional gauges and monitoring, I hooked up this Edge CTS3. I used to have the original unit, but I upgraded it to this because you can watch 10 parameters on this screen. So you've got your oil pressure, your fuel pressure, your battery, you know, your gear selector, throttle position sensor. I'll talk about that in a minute. EGTs, I have runtime there, and then coolant temp, oil temp, and transmission fluid temperature. And that way I can keep an eye on all the vitals of this engine and transmission for that matter. They do have the boost, the water temp, your coolant temp, and transmission temp, and your fuel level. But the fuel temp and your transmission temp are not exactly accurate. So that's why I have them up here. They're far more accurate when you read them off of this sensor than they are on the gauge. And actually that transmission sensor, it's a joke. I don't even think it reads transmission temperature, but hey. So you'll notice the tach is working perfectly. Without that swap helper unit, it's hard to get these to work right. I tried forever to make one, and I just couldn't. I couldn't get it to work right. For throttle control, if you want to use the 5R110, it's imperative you get the throttle position sensor set up in sync with the transmission. That's imperative. And then use HP tuners to tune it. So it's important to get the transmission dialed in with your throttle position sensor. Otherwise, it won't shift. The transmission just won't shift. So in coordination with using HP tuners, you can tune the 5R110 so it shifts like factory. And if you don't have HP tuners and you don't have the computer skills to do that, I recommend a guy by the name of Randy Gillum on he's on that Fummins site as well. A really good guy and knows his stuff and has the tune files now to make this thing shift really good. I chose to do it on my own so I could learn something from it, but would have saved, oh God, heaps of time just to use him. If you don't like the 5R110 and you want to go with an Allison or a ZF6, that's your choice. There's lots of options for that as well. So for controlling the engine, I mounted a extension on the throttle pedal and just mounted a cable out of a Ford Excursion with the V10. That worked perfect. That's about it. In a nutshell, it's time intensive. And again, if you don't know how to do wiring and read schematics and all that other stuff, I suggest you find someone outside that can do that for you. DCS does harnesses as well. I've heard mixed results. I think D-Stroke does it as well. But like I said, you're better off to do it yourself if you want a really trouble-free experience. That's about it, guys. I'll show you the cable, the throttle cable, and yeah. So throttle position sensor is right here. This one right there. That gives me an idea where my throttle is in reference, just for the 5R110. That's all. Yeah. So I'll shut it off, take you out and show you the so I'll shut it down, and then I'll show you guys the throttle cable and all that stuff. So it operates just like factory, guys, perfectly. So everything works just like factory, and that's the way I like it. I mean, yeah, you can make your own choices on that, but I really like it that way. So, and it's quiet. I know I know a lot of guys there, what, you got a Detroit in this? You got a Detroit in this thing? What, are you crazy? In all honesty, it's quiet. When I'm running down the road 70, 80 miles an hour, the road noise is more than the engine noise. And the reason for that is I put soundproofing in it. I soundproofed the engine itself with lead on the valve cover, the oil pan, and also I leaded the firewall with 1/16 gauge sheet lead. So yeah, it's quiet. You could hear, like, you could barely hear this thing running. So there's the bracket I made here, and then it runs up. I don't know if we could see that or not, but it runs up. Yeah, you can see that. And it pulls on that cable. All right. And then that cable runs out the firewall. So there's the cable there for the throttle cable. And it's hard to see. It's almost impossible to see coming out of the firewall. So these trucks are ideal for the swap. They're about the last year you could do this swap. I mean, I've heard of guys doing the 11 to 17 or 16 model, 11 to 16. But the CAN bus on that is much harder to crack than this one. This one's pretty easy. So I really can't give any advice on those trucks. I'm sure it's doable if you put your mind to it. So yeah, as you can see, it's awfully stacked. It's awfully cramped. With this overhang on the firewall here, this is ridiculous. That's why you got to lift the cab to do any major work on the 6.4. And this one included. I can't get to much without taking the cab up a few inches, you know. So I'll show you outside. I got another truck for a future project, an F550, and I'll show you what the engine bay looks like stock with no engine in it. So, and you can get a good idea of what you're going to deal with. Here's a good example of Fords that go cheap. This is a 2008 F550 XLT or XL cab chassis model, and I bought it a year and a half ago or so for 1,400 Canadian, so about 1,200 US or something like that. And it only had 140,000 miles on it, or kilometers, which is about 85 to 90,000 miles. Like nothing, just unbelievable. It's like it's like a brand new truck. So anyway, this is what you're gonna get when you pull the engine out of it, be it the Triton or the Power Stroke. Lots of room to play with, but once you start putting these engines in, I know for the Detroit there's not a lot of room when you're done. You can, you know, there's very little room. So I bought this to do a different project, and it's a perfect rolling chassis. It had the 6.4 in it with a cracked piston, and I just sold the 6.4, got rid of it. But I'll keep the PCM. The TCM, I've already taken that out, and then I'm going to pull the parts off of it, what I could use for my truck, if any. So, but that's what you're left with, guys. Once you pull the engine out, I've test fit a bunch of different things in here because this rolling chassis is going to be used on a different project. I can't speak for Chevys or Dodges, but I think you're going to run into the same situation with Chevy and Dodge for doing swaps. But I mentioned after 2011 there's a few guys doing that, but the Power Strokes and the Cummins, the newer ones, they're pretty much dialed in now, and I don't think it'd be worth your while to do a swap, but maybe that's different for you. So for the 2010 and older, a Cummins swap, it makes a lot of sense. And then this rig here is a good candidate, the 2099 to 2005, or 2007 for that matter. These make good swaps as well. This one's got the V10 Triton in it. Really nice engine, contrary to what you've heard. This one's got 220,000 miles on it. This is an American truck from Washington I bought 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now, but I don't have the heart to sell it. I never use it, but it's a good, really good truck, so I'm keeping it. Maybe I'll swap a Detroit in this, I don't know, but the issue is the heater core here. The fan and the heater core are very close to sharing the same spot with the Detroit. So, but for a Cummins, these make really good swaps. Same deal. A little easier to program this truck as opposed to mine, but the engine bay is very similar in size. Well, there you have it, guys. That's a video on swapping out a Cummins, Detroit, or any engine for that matter into one of these Super Duties. You could do it in the Dodge and the Chevys as well. I can't speak for those. I only know the Fords. The plan is to keep this rig for another 30 years or however many years I have left. So you never know, right? You could be dead tomorrow. So yeah, so that's it, guys. Thanks for checking in, and we'll catch you on the next video. Take care.